Okay, so we're looking at criminal sanctions today. The study design requires that you have an overview of 3 types of sanctions and their specific purpose. So you need to know specifically 3. We're going to look at imprisonment, a fine, and an intensive correction order. So you need to know the 3 sanctions and how they meet the purposes of sanctions. Just to remind you that the purposes of sanctions, there are 5. They are fair punishment, protecting the community, rehabilitation, deterrence, and denunciation. So you need to know how 3 sanctions each meet those specific purposes. So just generally, to be effective, a sanction needs to be appropriate to the severity of the crime, appropriate for the offender, and fair to the victim. It must be acceptable to the community, and it must fulfill those aims of sentencing. Firstly, imprisonment. When you're defining imprisonment, it's really important that you say that a convicted person can be sentenced to be detained in prison for a period of time, that this is seen as the sanction of last resort as it results in a loss of liberty, and it's really important that you make that point that imprisonment is a loss of liberty. In terms of how it meets the aims of sanctions, imprisonment obviously removes the offender from society, so it's good for punishment, and it's also able to protect society because the offender is prevented from committing further crimes. In terms of rehabilitation, they do have education programs in prison that aim to rehabilitate the offender. However, the influence of other prisoners tends to lead to further crimes, so imprisonment generally is not effective for rehabilitation. In terms of deterrence, imprisonment provides a general deterrence for the public at large because most people are deterred from committing a crime by the possibility of going to prison. And in terms of specific deterrence, the offender generally will not want to go to prison again, so they're discouraged from committing further crimes. However, again, that's undermined by the influence of other prisoners. In terms of denunciation, if the judge issues a particularly long prison sentence, then that can show society's disapproval of the crime. A fine is defined as a monetary penalty. There's a prescribed fine for an offence which is set out in the Act that establishes the offence, and the penalty is essentially paid to society or to the court. If the fine is not paid, then the offender can go to prison. In terms of evaluating how a fine meets the purposes of criminal sanctions, a fine serves to punish the offender, and it can act as a specific and a general deterrence because the person who commits the crime won't want to be fined again, and also in terms of a general deterrence, people are generally deterred from perhaps speeding or drink driving because they know that they might be fined. However, fines generally don't have an element of rehabilitation to them. They also don't really protect society because the person is still generally free in society and able to commit further crimes. If the judge issues a particularly large fine, then again that can show society's disapproval for that crime. It can denounce the crime. Intensive correction orders are essentially, they're the second most severe punishment. They're essentially an imprisonment sentence served in the community. They can be served for a maximum term of 12 months, and they're served as an intensive correction program where a number of restrictions are placed on the offender. So during the time of the intensive correction order, the offender must not reoffend, they must not commit further crimes, they must not leave Victoria without permission, they have to report to a community corrections officer twice a week, and they need to perform unpaid community work and or participate in treatment, either drug treatment or alcohol treatment or some other form of treatment for 12 hours each week. So there's a number of restrictions placed on their freedom. In terms of how intensive correction orders meet the aims of criminal sanctions, they're good for punishment because they restrict the offender's freedom. They can act as a specific and a general deterrence, again because the offender won't want to go back on an ICO, and also the community is deterred because they won't want to go on to intensive correction orders. The aim is to prevent the offender from reoffending, so they do serve as a form of protection because their time is taken up. They're not really free to commit further crimes. And special counselling and treatment aim to rehabilitate the offender, and also by avoiding imprisonment where the offender may be influenced by other prisoners. So ICOs tend to be much better at rehabilitation than a prison sentence. And that's it.